Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Music Meltdown. In this circumstance, we're going to be discussing probably the biggest band that we've done up to this point. Maybe you could make an argument for Credence, but I feel like the music of The Who is a little bit more universal overall. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? You got Roger Daltrey,
Yeah, I could.
Pete Townshend, bass player.
John Entwistle.
I knew the name, but I was totally blanking. You got Keith Moon and whoever replaced him. I didn't even bother to look that up.
Kenny Jones for that.
Kenny Jones. There we go. Yeah, this is a really fun one. I was not very familiar with The Who going into this at all. I'd heard Tommy and I'd heard Quadrophenia both once each, but everything else was very new to me. And it went over pretty well. I'm really happy that I did this because if I didn't, I don't think I would have ever done a full discography dive like I did today. Not today. I didn't listen to all 13 records that we're doing and live at Leeds in one day. Let's get that clear.
You didn't pull a like me last week. No, that's cool.
Well, to be fair, you last week was 6 records. You would have done half of what I did.
Yeah, no. That makes sense. I mean, it'd be an interesting one, to do all of them in one day, kind of give you different takes maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. I figure it's probably worth pointing out initially. I don't know if you did, but I listened to the US version of My Generation. And as well, we included Big Meaty Bouncy Ball album, whatever it's called.
Yeah, I listened to both versions of My Generation, so I'll rate the US one just for consistency's sake. But the ratings aren't different anyway, so yeah.
Gotcha.
I can start, I guess. My number 13 Who album is going to be Endless Wire. I just think it's straight up the one of theirs that offers the least to me. It's too long. It's like it's not a length issue. They have really long albums, but if they don't have the material to justify it being as long as it is, and yeah, I don't really like it that much. I think most of the tracks are really forgettable. One I like a fair bit is Black Widow's Eyes, but most of them aren't that great. Yeah, this is the only one I'm not going to listen to again. And a half out of 5.
Yeah, I pretty much concur with everything there. Endless Wire is also my bottom. I also have it at 2.5. And yeah, it's just a really bloated, worthless piece of a record. It doesn't really provide anything to the discography. It came out of nowhere. So it's like, what was even the purpose of recording the record? I think that the vocals are surprisingly good on this record. Despite that, I don't think that they sound as good as they end up doing on their 2019 release, which is kind of weird. Guess they just used more effects then. But they started to feel a little obnoxious on this record at a certain point. Like Daltrey was maybe going a little bit harder than he needs to in his older age on this record. But past that, it starts out pretty decent with fragments and like post theme, but I couldn't tell you anything about the rest of the tracks, but being honest. I do agree that it's a pretty bloated album, and while there isn't anything outwardly bad, it's just not an interesting record to actually sit down and listen to, like 2.5.
Yeah, it's a low 2.5 for me. If I was a little angrier today, I'd be giving it a 2. So moving on, my number 12 is Face Dances. Just to start out, I don't dislike any of these. All of the next ones I have pretty positive opinions on. This album has a lot of good stuff on it. I really like Another Tricky Day and Don't Let Go of the Coat and tracks like that. Those are really good. You Better You Bet's kind of like the main single off of this one, and I like that one a fair bit. But for the most part, it just feels really contemporary in a way that I don't really like. Like it feels like they're trying too hard to be with the times and move into the 80s. And I don't dislike Kenny Jones as their drummer. I just don't think he does a very good job of meshing with the rest of the band. He feels very like separate. But I'm still going to give this 3.5 out of 5 because it still offers me a lot of good songs, and I don't have much to complain about. I mean, some of the tracks are a little forgettable, but it's still a good album, and it's one that I'm fine listening to.
I'm not gonna lie, that one is a good bit higher for me. And I think that this is where we're gonna diverge because I actually like, well, we both like a lot of those records, but I feel like you're gonna have more of the post Keith Moon era at the bottom. Well, I have a few a decent bit higher than you would expect. I don't know how controversial this is. I've seen this record sort of float around wherever. My number 12 is going to be a quick one. Um, I'm just not sure about this record. And to my understanding, this is generally perceived as the worst of the Keith Moon era overall, maybe by numbers could take that spot, but those two are typically the bottom two I hear. And most of the songs here are sub 3 minutes. And because of that, I feel like it kind of hurts the album's sort of development and the evolution of the tracks for me. And I don't know, the songs aren't simple, but they often really lack that sort of hook that I feel like My Generation and Sell Out would have. Best cuts for me are probably Boris the Spider, Heat Wave, and So Sad About Us. But past that, there's not really anything that's going to make me want to return to it. I still think it's pretty decent for what it is, so it's still 3 stars for me. But yeah, I don't see myself going back to this one that often.
Yeah, that one's a bit higher on mine, we'll say. I really like the 9 minute closer on that. That's really cool to me. But my number 11 is going to be It's Hard. And this one, I think it's just, I'm going to give it the same rating as Face Dances. I just think it's a mildly improved version of that album. I think it has more of the Who's like edge and more of their kind of grit in their sound. It doesn't sound as like as trying too hard to be with the times. I think Eminence Front is an obvious standout from it. I really like It's Hard, and I've Known No War as well. Athena, I think, is a really good opener. Just overall, it's also a 3.5 out of 5, but I think everything on Face Dances is just a little better here, even though that neither of them are really amazing to me. I enjoy both of them a fair amount.
Well, predictable of you to knock out the two 80s records at the start, but I don't know. I like both of those records a decent bit. And to note, I listened to the discography starting at Who, going back to My Generation, just because I feel like it's better to get that later period stuff out of the way. So maybe that's why I was a little bit more partial to it upon my first listening. Because I'm still not at one of those records again. I am talking about Meaty Beady Big and Bouncy, which, fun fact, this is actually, Steph said this was her favorite Who record. Yeah, I don't know what to write here. This is sort of the first time we've included any of these like sort of compilation albums. So I wasn't really sure where to put it in comparison with the rest of their discography. It contains a lot of the singles coming from My Generation to Who's Next and a couple of the tracks that were on those records. And it lacks any sort of cohesive flow, in my opinion, because of it. And I don't need that flow inherently, but it really just, when the rest of the albums, because I think every record going up from here is good, it's what's going to leave it in just being decent. Best tracks were I Can't Explain, I Can See for Miles, My Generation, and The Seeker. Past that, it didn't really do a ton for me though, and I have it at 3 stars as well.
Yeah, I think, that album might have one of the strongest in terms of individual songs because it has all those great singles, but it doesn't flow as well as most of their others do. It doesn't feel like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, so to speak. My number 10 is going to be Who 2019. I like this one. This is a really good album, but it has some problems, but I'm confident giving it a low 4. I think it's pretty strong. And I think every song on it, I like at least a bit. I think Ball and Chain's really good. I really like I Don't Want to Get Wise and All This Music Must Fade. Hero Ground Zero. I just think it's loaded with really great songs. I really like how it has this kind of conceptual element to it, where it's almost like the Who is like reevaluating their career, and it feels like a very self-aware kind of fourth wall breaking album. I think that's cool. Yeah, just overall, I think it's solid. I enjoy it, and it might rise. I might be willing to bump this up to eighth-ish on a re-listen, but for now it's number 10.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And this is the only record that we sort of talked about before doing this because I was really surprised by this record because I thought this was going to suck. A band that started out in like 1965 has no right to be putting out a record half as good as this in 2019. Let's just get the cat out of that. They still sound very good. You can tell that there is the vocal modulation and they're really going in there to make it work. But I mean, it came out very well put together, and the band still sounds quite good as well. And I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a bad song either. Clear standouts for me though were Beads on a String, Breaking News, and Rockin' in a Rage. My main issue is how I feel some of the tracks tended to blend together at points, aside from those standouts that I mentioned. But yeah, this is an incredibly impressive record from the band that was going on like 40 years at this point, more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be 60 in 2 years, so
That's crazy.
pretty insane.
Yeah, 3.5 for me. Really solid record.
Moving on, my number 9. This is perhaps the closest thing I have on here to a spicy opinion, but I have the Who Sell Out. I don't think this album is as good as it is hyped to be. It's still a 4 out of 5 for me, but I think it is the weakest of their 60s albums. And I think I like the idea of the commercial in between the tracks. And I think a lot of the tracks are good. I Can See for Miles is one of the Who's all-time best songs. And I think it works better here than on Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, where it's just one of the countless singles. But it has a lot of good songs. I think Silas Stingy and Marianne with the Shaky Hand are really good. But overall, I just don't really know if this style suits the Who that well. I don't know if they're meant for this kind of art pop as opposed to the huge rock songs that they kind of later do, and the kind of epic concept albums. But it's still good, 4 out of 5. So yeah, I don't hate it.
Interesting. We both have a fun little hot take at our number 9. Yours is maybe a little bit more controversial than mine, but at number 9 for me, I have Who Are You? I've seen this record is a little bit polarizing within the Who canon, and I can understand why. I'm going to start out by saying this. I think the synth sounds cheesier on this record than the 280s albums, which took me by surprise. I'm not a big fan of the synth sound on this record. It doesn't kill it, mind you, but just sort of, I don't know, after Quadrophenia and other Who records that utilize synth before, it seems a little haphazardly put in here. I think it starts out really solid. I like New Song, Had Enough, and Sister Disco a decent bit. But there's a little lull for me with Music Must Change and Trick of Light. But I feel like the final 3 cuts are also really great, and they finally nail down the sound they were going for on the record. But overall, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag for me quality-wise, which is why it's going to rank a little bit lower. It's still a really solid record, and I give it 3.5 stars. It's good. But I wouldn't put it in like the upper echelon of Who records like some people do. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's going to be higher on mine, I think. But my number 8 is going to be The Who by Numbers. I think this album it's one of those albums I feel like was maybe underrated when it initially came out. But I think now among Who fans, it's become kind of overrated. Like, it's sold as this kind of like more personal album that's like way better, which I don't really see. I think it has 2 amazing, kick-ass songs on it, Slip Kid and Dreaming from the Waist. I don't really need anything else on it. It's enough to get it to 4 because all the individual songs are good, but there's just nothing that, like, if I was on a desert island, I'd need to pick as like a great song or whatever. I read that Pete Townshend had writer's block, so almost every song he wrote for the album was put on the album. That definitely seems true. But it's still good, and I think Daltrey sounds good singing-wise. He still has that lion's roar type thing going on. Moon still has the really good drum sound. Yeah, 4 out of 5. It's not amazing, but it's a good, solid album.
Well, Aiden, it's been really hard to hear you diss on those two Who records that I really love, but I shall start talking about It's Hard now. This is really close to 4 stars for me. I really enjoyed the Who's 80s output, but there's a pretty glaring flaw in here that taints a lot of the record. I don't think that this album sounds very good. You can tell that it came out in the early 80s and it's very reminiscent of that. And I don't know, I really like Face Dances. I think that that record sounds pretty good for what it's worth. And I just think that It's Hard probably has better songs, but I think Face Dances is the better produced and written record for me. But there is also some very cheesy synth work on this record as well. They really had a rough time with those synth sounds for me. But past that, Athena is absolutely fantastic. Despite the synth work, I thought Cook's Country was really good. Eminent Force was different from the rest of the record and really shines because of it. I've Known No War, One at a Time, and The Man is a Man were all very good. My main issue is the closer, Cry If You Want. I feel like the first half of it kind of drags, but past that, it's all right. And I feel like if the songs were released in the 70s, like say this record came out when Who by Numbers came out, I feel like it could have been a much better record and probably would have done better for them commercially as well. I give it a strong 3.5. My last 3.5. No, second last 3.5. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the 80s Who songs are just as well written as previous stuff, but I don't think their sound blends well with the 80s like aesthetic at all. But my number, what are we at? 7 is going to be a quick one, their sophomore release. I just think it's got a lot of strong songs on it. I think the only problems are the Keith Moon written songs. I think they kind of suck. Every other song I think is really good. I really like Daltrey, See My Way. I like Entwistle's 2 songs, but I think Townsend absolutely has the best stuff on here, of course. Run, Run, Run is a really good opener. It had like this very dark, kind of heavy sound. So Sad About Us, the title track. Don't Look Away almost reminded me of like a Bird's Cut at points. It was kind of country flavored, which I liked. Yeah, just overall 4 out of 5. It's a solid kind of slice of 60s, psychedelia slash mod style, which is cool. It's the last 4 out of 5. Everything else up from here is 4.5 or more. But yeah, 4 out of 5, and I'm always happy to throw it on.
I'm really sorry. I feel like this is the record that you're going to have way higher. My next placement is going to be My Generation. And here's the thing with My Generation. It's a really solid debut record for The Who, and it showcases the always fantastic rhythm section that Keith Moon and Sean Entwistle had, the amazing lyrics and guitar playing of Pete Townshend with the beautiful vocals of Roger Daltrey. Everything here on paper is a total knockout. However, I feel like a lot of other 60s records from a similar time, it's a little bit scattered in the best tracks and weaker cuts. I'm not crazy about Out in the Street, La La Lies, Much Too Much, Kids Are All Right, and Please, Please, Please. They're all just kind of decent to me. I enjoy them when they're on, but I'm never going to really choose to listen to them. Despite that, the rest of the cuts are just very good to great. I don't mind The Good's Gone, My Generation, It's Not True, and Ox, and Legal Matter are very good to great. I'm not crazy about the sound of this album. It's not an awful sounding record, but when you have stuff like Rubber Soul and Having to Rave Up with the Yardbirds coming out, I believe these are all 65. It does kind of sound a little bit behind the times, but then again, they're going for something a little bit different from that, so I can kind of see why. It's short and generally speaking, very enjoyable, and it shows the roots of what the band would maybe go on to do in the future. But at the end of the day, I think about there's too many cuts that I'm not that blown away by to really get it up to 4 stars. It's my last 3.5.
Yeah, my take on that album is that I absolutely love every original. I don't like the covers they have on it, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Right now, I'm gonna go on Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, which is 4.5. And the reason it is that it's not cohesive. It's just a collection of all their singles, but all their singles are pretty good. So it's gonna do pretty well for me. I really like, My Generation, obviously. I'll talk about that one later. I think The Kids Are All Right is a really good song. I think it has this kind of like power pop 60s thing going where it's very kind of catchy and pretty sounding. I think Magic Bus is really good. I like Happy Jack a lot. I think Keith Moon's drums on that are really strong. Substitute's really good. That's another great song on that one. Yeah, it's just it sums up like 60s singles who, which was almost a different beast from their album's output, where it was all about like the individual like power pop singles, which I like a lot. So it's 4.5. It would be higher if it was more cohesive. I don't think it is, which is kind of a problem, but yeah, I like it a fair bit.
Yeah, as Big Star showed a little bit ago, power pop isn't really something that I'm that big into. I love
Yeah.
Badfinger. That's like my height of power pop, but I don't know. It's pretty hit or miss for me a lot of the time. Probably the worst placement on my list is how high I have Face Dance. I thought that this record was great. I really enjoyed this album. It's a very good, straightforward rock record. I love the sound of it. It's got such a nice shimmer across the record, and it just is fun. It really just it felt like the first bit of a Who record that I could just like put on at any time and just like have a blast. Like I said, I listened to them in reverse order. So. Um, a lot of these songs are corny. Like that's the biggest issue with the '80s Who stuff. It's pretty corny, pretty, as you were saying, stereotypical to the other '80s rock at the time. But You Bet is fantastic. Don't Let Go the Coat, Cash Cash, and the whole stretch until Daily Records, which I think Daily Records is a little bit middling compared to the other songs. But overall, pretty much all the rest of the songs I thought were very good. And the only reason why I can't bump it higher is because, I mean, it's Face Dances. I feel bad enough putting it this high already, even if I'm being perfectly honest. I probably could bump it up one more slot, but I don't want people to kill me. So
Yeah, that's understandable. My next pick is My Generation, their debut, which might be coming to you, but I really like this album. I think the only problems, as I said before, I don't like the James Brown covers. I don't mind, and Please Please Me, Please Please Please. There we go. But I love all the originals. I think this is Keith Moon's best drum album, in my opinion. I think The Good's Gone and La 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 Lies were two of the first songs I learned on drums. They're really hard to do. He does a great job. My Generation is great. I love Kids Are All Right, as I said. I think Much Too Much is an underrated song. I like how it has kind of lyrics and like rhymes that you wouldn't expect. There aren't a lot of songs that rhyme like bevy with levy. Like it's kind of cool in that respect. And I think the aux is absolutely insane. It's Keith Moon's drums on that are absolutely crazy to try to replicate. It sounds great. I think the closer is really good too. Circles, which is just on the US, has this kind of French horn in it, played by Entwistle, which I like. Yeah, just overall 4.5. I think this is one of the strongest of 65 for me. I agree it's not as refined as some of the other albums, but I think they're going for just something totally different. So I don't know if I could compare it. It's just going for like maybe one of the first real hard rock albums I can think of in music. There aren't a lot of things before this that sound anything like this, kind of almost punkish at some points. So yeah, 4.5. It's my number 5.
okay, this is when I start making some more enemies. My number 5 is Who's Next. Here is my thing with Who's Next. There's not a lot to say about this album. It's just a very good hard rock album. However, I have some issues with certain tracks, and this is where things start getting iffy. Not crazy about Baba O'Reilly, but I still think it's a good song. Um, I thought Bargain was great, but Love Ain't for Keeping is probably the weakest song on the record. Um, it's really only 2 minutes long. I'd probably just cut it in retrospect because it doesn't really add too much, in my opinion. However, in My Life, The Song Is Over, and Getting in Tune, those are all superb songs and probably my favorite on the record. However, I'm not crazy about Going Mobile or Behind Blue Eyes. I didn't really get the love for. I don't know. And they still aren't bad. And of course, it ends with Can't Get Fooled Again, which is classic for a reason. It's a great song. And even if I'm not big on Scream at the end, I still think that's a very good song. Which, I don't know. When it's on, it shows why the record is a classic and why so many people would put it at like the top of the list. But for me, I think it's a little bit less interesting, maybe even less interesting than say Face Dances for me. It's a very good and a very well put together record, but it just doesn't hit me in that level that other hard rock records from a similar time period would. I still give it 4 stars though, and it's kind of hard to deny a record as classic as this is.
Yeah, I do have some kind of minor problems with that album, but that's not my next one. My next one is going to be Who Are You, number 4. This is the last like real conceptual kind of album they do, and I like it a fair amount. I really like the way the synth sounds. It's almost going for like a sci-fi tone, which is kind of cool, you know. I think almost every song on here I really like. I think Sister Disco and Who Are You are kind of like the obvious standouts, but I also think Had Enough is really good. I really like Guitar and Pen a lot. I think Music Must Change is cool with how they use background like sound effects instead of percussion. Like that's kind of a cool experimenty thing to do. And just overall, it seems like this is a big recovery from their last album, Who by Numbers, I think, because I don't think this album, I think that album was suffering from no ideas. And I think this album, they're back to having kind of a purpose with their songs. And it very much feels like a Who's Next Part 2, which it probably should, because I think it was actively conceived of as like a Who's Next sequel project, essentially, which I like it. Yeah, and 4.5 out of 5.
Very interesting. You're talking about shit, what's the record call again? You're talking about Who Are You, and I'm talking about the Who by Numbers right now. In many ways, this record almost kind of reminded me of like Zeppelin 3. And that's another record that I really love. It sort of comes as a come down from what would have been 3 concept records from the Who and kind of what the 2 sort of hard rock classics, the first 2 Zeppelin records were. It strips everything back and really layers it down to just the playing and vocals. And I just loved it. I just thought this was fantastic. The band seems bitter here. They don't seem happy, and it just adds to such a good. It just I like it. Words are hard. I'm sorry. A lot of the lyrical content on this record, one might boil down to complaining, and it is kind of an issue with the record. It's a bit of a downer at times, but just the sonic direction mixed with that bitterness that you can see on the record. It's a great contrast to me. Despite that, I think that the sound on this record, this might be my favorite sounding Who record. I just really adore what they're going for here. I think it's a really well put together and well produced record. Um, the bass on this record really sticks out to me. I love a lot of the bass lines that John Entwistle was going for. And they're really lively within this calm environment and allow a lot of the songs to breathe a good bit. Success Story and How Many Friends were the only cuts where I feel the lyrics don't really blend as well with the actual songs. But past that, I thought every other song was pretty great. And it's a strong 4-star record for me. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It's an album that I still give 4 stars, so maybe we aren't so different. My number 3 is going to be Who's Next, which I think is, besides My Wife, I don't like that song at all. I love every single other song on this album I think it has this like amazing like open sound, like it feels like they're playing like in like a grassland or something. Just sounds absolutely huge, which is amazing to me. I think Baba O'Reilly's awesome. I really like, I think Love Ain't for Keeping and Song Is Over are also really good standouts. I think Entwistle's playing on Getting in Tune is one of his best bass performances. And yeah, I really like Won't Get Fooled Again as a closer. I like that it boils down this kind of epic sound. I'm not super crazy about Going Mobile, but it's got 7 like perfect tracks to me. It has one it's meh and one I don't really like. So it's going to be a 5-star for me because of how much I love the 7 out of 9 on here. But it's a weaker 5. It's kind of in the lower echelons of my 5, but I still I think it's enough of like this pure like musical statement that I like it enough for it to be there, even if I have some minor problems with some of the songs.
Yeah, I can see why people love it as much as they do. For me, I feel like it's maybe lacking a little bit of that sort of. At times, it almost feels a little one note in what they're going for, despite the tracks not really being that way.
I agree. It feels like every single song is just about like hammering you over the head with how big it is, which I kind of like. So I'm fine with that.
That's fair. I really thought this was going to be my number one coming into this. I always said that I preferred the record to Tommy, but on these listens, number 3, I'm going to have Quadrophenia. I'm sorry, but I still think this is a fantastic album. And I want to point something out. In reviewing this, Who Sell Out, and Tommy, I kind of tried to subtract I tried to view them in how the records would work if they didn't have the concept there. It was like just the standalone tracks by themselves and how well they would work within that context to make it more fair against the rest of the discography. It still ended up being my top 3, so that's kind of funny, but yeah, there are just so many great songs on this record, and highlights for me are The Punk and the Godfather, Helpless Dancer, Is It in My Head, Dr. Jimmy, Hovering Over Me, just to list my favorites. I do feel that there are a couple of weaker cuts, I Am the Sea and Bellboy, not really doing it for me personally. However, when you have a double record and 15 out of 17 of the songs on the record I would consider very good, that's a massive accomplishment. And the synth sounds absolutely amazing on this album. In comparison to Who Are You and even the 80s records to me, this is really where they mastered the synth work, which is weird because this is at an earlier point in the development of synth as a whole. So it's weird they're just knocking out this great sound for it. Yeah, this is just a really great album. I can only get it to 4 stars because it doesn't grip me in the way that a 4.5 or a 5-star record does. But it doesn't change the fact that I would highly recommend this to anybody, especially if you're more into classic rock or more into The Who than I am. It's definitely a 100% recommendation.
I agree with you on I Am the Sea not being like perfect. I think it works pretty good as an opener. But yeah, my number 2 this time, it's between the 2 big rock operas, which is kind of predictable for me, I guess. But my number 2 is going to be Tommy. I think Tommy is just an amazing artistic statement. I just think my only problems with it, I think it has a couple. I don't think it has as much of a consistent tone as Quadrophenia, and I think part of it is that on Quadrophenia, Pete Townshend writes every song. It's the only Who album where that's the case. On this one, there's a couple he outsourced to Entwistle and Moon, which, it's not a problem. I like that it has this cohesive sound going for it. I can't even for this and Quadrophenia, I can't even cite individual tracks because they're working almost as like a single 70-minute song. So just in terms of talking about the album overall, I like the story it tells. I think it has a lot of cool commentary about like celebrity and fame and that kind of thing. Maybe probably a better story straight up than Quadrophenia, which is just about like an asshole. But it's one of Townsend's best kind of concepts that he worked on, and I just think every song has this really cohesive kind of blend of like the traditional hard rock with more soft kind of acoustic sounds at points, and it just sounds sounds big the whole way through. It sounds like everything is building up to something bigger, which is just really cool. Yeah, and the only reason I kind of wish Tommy's Holiday Camp wasn't on here for me. I don't like having that. I think it should take itself a bit more seriously, which is why I'm glad Quadrophenia did it. But otherwise, I'm very happy with what's here. And, you know, these are really just splitting hairs. It's a top 20 album for me. And it's a 5 out of 5 for me.
I'm gonna be honest. I really badly wanted my number 2 to be my number 1 because this is the Who record I would put on more often. This is the one that I want to listen to right now because I loved it, but I can't say within good reason that the Who Sell Out is their best record. It's going to be my number 2. And yeah, there are just small things that put Tommy ahead of it. But this is definitely the weirdest album. It has a lot of psychedelic elements and a lot of weird touches. Almost reminded me at points of Notorious Bird Brothers was the album I was getting, which I don't know, definitely better comparison points, but that's just the one that went on to me. And those added commercials, which really add a certain level to the music that I wouldn't get from it that I would expect. And it works in such a cool manner. I thought that the first half of this record was pretty much all aces. The first like 5 or 6 the first like 5 songs, I would probably call it a 5-star record. Armenia Sitting in the Sky, Mary Ann with Shaky Hand, Tattoo, and I Can See for Miles, just absolutely exceptional. However, it does start to drop a little bit with Relax and Silas Stingy, just being all right in comparison to the rest of the other cuts. However, Sunrise and Rail are both just absolutely fantastic to me. And it really does make me want to put this record at number 1, but I can't say within confidence that this is the better artistic statement. I can't say that it is the better written or the better conceived album. And it sucks because this is the one that I'm going to reach for if I want to go back to the Who after this. I still only have it at 4 stars, but man, I was very impressed by this record.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's funny, you know, I had that at number 9, but I also gave it 4 stars. I guess I'm higher on this band overall.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. My number 1 is my second favorite album I think ever released, just ever, Quadrophenia. I think it's absolutely perfect. This is an album I could talk about for 17 hours and still have more to say about. I love everything on it. It has this, story is not as strong as Tommy. It's more straightforward. There's not as much of themes and that kind of thing, but it packs such a powerful punch, and just every song just like smashes you over the head with how huge it is. And I just love that. I love just hearing something that is absolutely just like the music of the tallest mountain, the biggest ocean in the world. Like, it's just cool. I mean, it's just badass as hell. So the basic idea is a mod, like a young criminal, basically, with a 4-way split personality, and they all kind of represent members of the band. What they do is really cool. They give each member a leitmotif that plays through, which they usually only do for like films, but it kind of says how much of a narrative project this is, that they use that for just a straight up album. There's just so much to it. You have these repeating themes. It gives every track the sense that it's part of a bigger whole. Sometimes it is my favorite album ever made. Sometimes it gets up that high. I just love it. I love what they're going for. I could put it on at any time, any track, 5 out of 5. And a pretty high one at that.
Man, I wish those times came around more often. We wouldn't be talking about fucking Brian Wilson as often as we have to.
Hey, it's hard, I like to talk about different people different times.
No, I totally get that. My top three albums are basically always in flux with one another. It really could be any of them at any time, so I don't fault you for that at all.
Yeah.
My number one, if you haven't picked up on it, is going to be Life at Leeds. No, my number one's going to be Tommy. But man, this is a rare circumstance in which I'm going to be picking a record that I think is less consistent, but I think it's a better overall statement. And it's hard to ignore the story of this record, the story of Tommy, the deaf, dumb, and blind boy, and how his parents are trying to fix him until his eventual awakening and downfall, and the sort of trials and tribulations that come with that. And there's a pretty big issue with the story for me, and that is every character is fucking terrible. Why are they all just these god-awful, horrible people? Does this kid not have one good person in his entire life? Like, fuck. It doesn't ruin it, but like, Jesus. Anyways, especially like Cousin Kevin. Like, oh my God, he is so overbearing. Fucking, oh my goodness, Cousin Kevin. But anyways, going on to the music, the overture is a fantastic way to open it. I really love 1921, Amazing Journey, and Sparks. Everything's all right, but Christmas is probably my favorite track. I think that song's just amazing. Cousin Kevin is a good song. I'm not crazy about the Acid Queen, but within the story of the record, I understand why it's there. And I can't fault any songs on this record, even if I like them less, because they're also integral to the plot line, except for Pinball Wizard, but it's fucking Pinball Wizard, so who cares? The song's amazing. Moving forward from that, Go the Mirror is really great. Sensation, Cy Simpson, and We're Not Going to Take It as well really add to the record as a whole. I'm not going to sit here and act like this is a perfect album. I don't think that The Who, for me personally, are ever going to reach that height. It's just not really the sort of classic rock I'm more inclined to go for. I'm going more for like a Bowie. I lean more towards like the singer-songwriter aspect of that, or something like a Beatles or Birds in that regard. But if I had to stack Tommy against the other records, I think that this is their best artistic statement. And it's the one that can really hold my attention in the way that none of their other records can. But because of the shakiness I feel within the track list of points, I can still only give it 4 stars.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this whole songwriter thing, that's one thing I really like about The Who. If you compare them to the Stones or Zeppelin, they have like a main songwriter who's contributing to everything, where they feel like the more like artsy version of those guys in a way at points, which I kind of like. I like being a pretentious asshole, so I'm here for that.
I too enjoy being a pretentious asshole. I like if the Beatles had 4 good members instead of 3 good members and George. I'm kidding. Okay, but yeah, I listened to this one just because I figured I wanted to get the whole experience. If you had to put Live at Leeds in here, where do you think it'd go for you?
Number 3, 5 out of 5.
Number 2, 4 out of 5.
Yeah,
I don't even like live records typically, but that one, it's got a reputation for a reason. That record is just absolutely phenomenal. That is the best version of My Generation.
I don't agree with that.
All 17 minutes.
Yeah, it's an experience, but listen, I love.
I'll happily put on like 2112 at any given time. I have no issues with just listening to those long ass epics.
That's fair, but the thing is like My Generation doesn't seem like the song that like merits being that long. Like it's not telling this like long epic story. It's just like an asshole kid like whining about his parents for 17 minutes, you know.
And that's kind of what makes it work though, because it sort of builds off of this song that doesn't have that merit to begin with and just sort of makes it deserve it.
Yeah, they use a lot of like riffs from their other outtakes. Like there's a song they did that wasn't on any of their albums called Naked Eye, where they like put part of the riff of that into My Generation and they like add all these extra elements. So that's cool. I don't dislike it, but you know, it's not like the standout for Live at Leeds for me. But yeah, I do love that album.
So if it wasn't clear, you like The Who a little bit. You're a little positive on this band.
Yeah, probably, you know, depending on the day. My favorite band, sometimes second. It depends on my mood, depends on what I'm feeling, but definitely always a GOAT for me.
And they're not that high for me, obviously. They're not enough weird 2000 indie rock for me. They don't have enough twee in their sound to really constitute my love, but I have massive amounts of respect for this band. And if I had to say what I think the most consistent band of the Beatles, the Who, the Stones, and the Kinks were, which are kind of like my big four of 60s rock, I would say the Who is pretty quickly the most
I agree.
consistent of those
They
groups.
they are to me. They're the only one of those bands where I think a good 90% of their albums are in some way great.
I would. Well, with that being said, we're going to be dipping back into the 60s for our next artist. We are going to be doing the Beau Brummels.
Yeah.
I know nothing about this band.
Well, we'll see.
I'm not looking forward to the reunion record. I gotta lay it out here. The reunion record is fucking nowhere. This record is like ceased from the earth. I literally had to message somebody
Got
on
deleted.
Rate Your Music who had a digital version of it to see if I could get the FLAC files so that we could even do the discography.
We didn't have to do it. It is an hour, and it is I don't foresee it being as good as
I don't foresee it being good. I'm expecting an in-space level disaster.
That's hard to achieve. I don't know. That's a difficult one to match.
In Space wasn't an hour long, and by people who started out in the mid-60s. To clarify, we aren't going to be including Brummels 66. We kind of don't want to do covers records because they're literally never going to be somebody's best record. What's the point?
Yeah.
At that point.
I would push to include it if it was good, but it sucks, so I didn't push to include it.
I would push to include it if we didn't find Cutie. So, with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed our rundown of the Who records. Hopefully, the Beau Brummels won't tank all of our views that we get from this. And I hope all of you have an absolutely fantastic week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.